In 2012, police went to a house in the countryside of New South Wales, Australia. They found something that would completely change what they thought about families in Australia. What they found was more than just parents not taking good care of their kids. It was a family that had been living together for many years, in a way that was completely against normal rules. In this family, the idea of clear family relationships didn't exist anymore. Before we get into the story, if you like stories that show the darkest parts of human life, stories that make us wonder how such things can happen today, then this is for you. Click the like button and subscribe. Let's see who is watching from far away. Tell us your location and time in the comments. Now, let's continue with the story. The morning of August 14, 2012, started like any other day for the child protection workers driving on a bumpy dirt road towards the Borough area. Sarah Hemsworth and Michael Garrett had done many visits like this before. Homes in the countryside often had problems. Being far away from others could lead to kids not being cared for. But nothing in their training prepared them for what they found at the end of that 40 kilometers drive from the nearest town. The property suddenly appeared through thick bushes. It was a group of buildings that barely looked like homes. Shaky tents were set up between rusty cars. Rough shelters made from old metal and wood scraps were scattered in the open area. The smell hit them first. A very strong mix of human waste, rotten trash, and something else they couldn't figure out right away. No power lines went to the property. There was no clear water source, just a muddy pond. This wasn't just being poured. This was something much more planned. Children came out of the shadows as the officers got out of their car. Hemsworth counted at least 8 kids, from very young ones to teenagers. All of them looked similar, with unusual faces, eyes set too far apart, and mouths that seemed like they couldn't close properly. Their clothes were dirty and ripped. Many were not wearing shoes even though it was cold winter. When Garrett tried to talk to them, asking simple questions about their names and ages, the children made sounds that seemed like a language but didn't make any sense to him. The children talked to each other with deep sounds, using a language only they understood. An adult woman came closer. She was unfriendly and angry right away. She only said her name was Betty and she wouldn't give her last name or any papers. When asked about the children's parents, her answers were confusing and didn't make sense. This child belonged to her sister, that one to her brother, another to someone else who wasn't there. The relationships didn't make any sense. Hemsworth tried to check on a child who looked very thin, and noticed the girl couldn't walk without a clear limp. When asked about doctors, Betty got angry, saying they didn't need anything from people outside the family. The officers went back to their car, worried by what they had seen, but not sure how bad it really was. Normal rules meant they had to write down what they saw, talk to their bosses, and maybe come back with more help. Neither of them could have guessed that this first visit had just uncovered what would become one of the most shocking cases of families having children together for many generations in Australia's history. The investigation that followed would show secrets going back many years. A family that had purposefully kept itself away from others to keep doing things that went against all the right and legal rules of today's society. Within 3 days of that first visit, Sarah Hemsworth went back to the property with a team of 6 more officers, 2 police officers, and a court paper saying they could immediately take all the children away. What they found during that visit would need experts in family history to fully understand. The family structure was unlike anything normal. 4 grown-up brothers and sisters lived on the property. Betty, whom they had met before, along with her brothers Charlie and Dwayne, and another sister named Martha. At first, they thought 12 children lived with them. But the adults avoided giving exact numbers and ages. Even more worrying was that they couldn't or wouldn't say which children belonged to whom. Betty said 3 children were hers, but couldn't name their father. Charlie said he had no children, then later said he had 2 sons. Martha stayed quiet, only showing anger with her eyes. Detective Inspector Paul Granger, who was in charge of the investigation, knew right away that normal ways of asking questions wouldn't work. The children taken from the property were from 5 to 17 years old. But none of them had birth certificates, shot records, or any papers showing they existed. When asked for their full names, most could only give single sounds or nicknames. Bluey was what the others called one boy who was about 13. A girl who was maybe 10 only answered to Kip. These weren't sweet childhood names. These were the only names they had ever known. The Department of Community Services started emergency DNA tests within 2 days of taking the children. This was a normal step in difficult cases about children. The results that came back 3 weeks later sent the investigation in a completely new direction. The main DNA expert, Dr. Rhonda Salzberg, asked for an urgent meeting with the lead investigators. What she showed in that private meeting completely changed the case. Almost every child tested showed signs in their DNA that their parents were closely related, not just distant cousins but brothers and sisters, or parent and child. The DNA proof showed something Dr. Salzberg had never seen in 26 years of studying DNA, a family tree that had folded in on itself. Normal family relationships no longer made sense. Children who looked like brothers and sisters also showed DNA signs of being uncle and niece. Others showed signs that their parents were also from family members having children together. Dr. Salzberg's report had a phrase that would be repeated in court later. Family members having children together for many generations to the highest degree. The family had been having children only among themselves, not just for years but for tens of years. Each new group of children had been born from parents in the same family, making genetic problems worse with great exactness. It was almost impossible for such patterns to happen by accident. This was done on purpose, planned. A family that had intentionally kept family members having children together across many generations. Granger ordered more tests, including for the 4 adults. When those results came, the full horror became clear. Betty and Charlie were both parents and brother-sister to several of the children. Dwayne's DNA showed he was brother, father, and uncle to different children in the group at the same time. Martha's DNA showed her own parents had been closely related. The meaning of this was shocking. This family pattern hadn't started with the grown-ups they found. It had been passed down to them. A pattern of family members having children together, for many generations that went back further than anyone had yet found. Doctors chosen by the court started to check the children who were taken away. Their findings added developmental disasters to the biological nightmare. 10 of the 12 children had big problems with their thinking. 8 had never learned to read. 5 couldn't count past 10. The oldest, a 17-year-old girl they started to call Ruth, thought like a 7-year-old. She had never gone to school, never seen a TV, never left the property. When asked about her parents, she pointed to both Charlie and Betty, not understanding why the question confused the people asking. The physical checks showed more awful things. 6 children had problems hearing, from not hearing very well to hardly hearing at all. 4 had eye problems that needed help right away. 3 had bone problems because they didn't get enough vitamins and food. Every single child had scars from hurts and sicknesses that were not treated. One boy's leg had healed crooked after a break that never saw a doctor. A girl of about 8 had teeth that were rotted down to brown stumps. But maybe the most upsetting thing was that they couldn't talk normally. Language experts brought in to check how the children talked figured out they had made up a simple shared language. A basic system of grunts, hand signs, and made-up words that only they could understand. They could understand some regular English, but mostly they used their own made-up language. Many years of being alone had made children who were different in language, social skills and genes from other Australians. They were in a way a separate group that lived hidden inside a modern country. The medical checks done at Sydney Children's Hospital between September and November of 2012 found problems that DNA experts had only seen before in lab studies of animals that had been bred within their own family for many generations. Dr. Patricia Newcomb, the children's doctor in charge of the checks, put together a report that would become secret evidence in court later. Its information was too upsetting for the public to see. The physical problems were different for each child, but they followed clear patterns. Head measurements showed problems in 8 of the 12 children. Their skulls were either unusually narrow or too wide, creating the special face shapes Hemsworth had noticed on that first visit. These weren't just about looks. Brain scans showed that 3 children had smaller brain space, which physically stopped their brains from growing properly before they were born. Ruth, the 17-year-old, had the most complete checkup. Brain tests showed she had an IQ of 54, which means she had a medium level of thinking disability. More worrying was that her problem likely came not from one bad gene, but from many bad genes building up and showing up all at once. Her parents being closely related meant that harmful gene versions had no chance to be covered up by healthier ones. She had inherited 2 copies of damaged genes from both sides of her family, each making the other's bad effects stronger. The younger children had an even worse outlook for their future. A boy they named Timothy, about 9 years old, was completely deaf in both ears. Biology tests suggested his problem came from badly formed inner ear parts, a rare problem from birth that doctors linked to family members having children together. He had never gotten hearing aids, never learned sign language, never been given any tool to live in his silent world. His being alone even within his family had made him almost impossible to reach. 2 sisters thought to be 11 and 13. Both needed emergency tooth surgery. Their teeth had grown in messy ways, overlapping and crooked, which stopped them from chewing properly. Cavities that weren't treated had turned into painful infections. The older sister's infection had spread to her jawbone, needing part of the dead bone to be removed. The dentist's report said their tooth structure suggested they were born with a problem in their tooth enamel, likely because bad genes that should have stayed hidden were both active. Kip, the 10-year-old girl, had a bad curved spine, bent at a 38-degree angle. Bone doctors said that getting help early in childhood could have stopped her spine from becoming permanently bent. Instead, she had grown into a teenager with her body literally twisting out of proper shape. Surgery might make it a little better, but she would have physical problems from not being cared for the rest of her life. The mental checks were just as terrible. Dr. Hammond Priest, a childmind doctor with 30 years of experience, found himself dealing with behaviors he had never seen before. Several children showed what he called a deep lack of understanding of social rules. They only understood love in ways that were wrong. When foster families tried normal parent actions, the children were confused or acted sexually in wrong ways. They had been taught to see physical contact between family members as normal family interaction. Bluey, the 13-year-old boy, got very angry and violent when separated from his brothers and sisters. How he acted when close to others suggested he had been taught to see his family as the only safe place in a dangerous world. Attempts to put him in group therapy with other children in care completely failed when he attacked a boy who sat too close to one of his sisters. His angry protection came not from healthy sibling bonds, but from something much more upsetting. He had been raised to guard family property from people outside the family. The speech doctor assigned to work with the children, Elena Vasquez, spent 2 months trying to understand their way of talking. What she found was a language reduced to just the most important things. They had words for food, danger, and basic needs, but they didn't have words for big ideas like future, hope, or choice. Their language had stopped growing at a toddler level, never getting better, because no one around them spoke in more complex ways. They talked like people who had never needed to say anything more than what they needed to survive right now. Most scary was what all the experts thought together. The youngest children, those under 7, had the worst problems. Each group of children had suffered more damage than the one before. The bad genes were getting worse faster, building up with each new child born from family members together. If the authorities hadn't stepped in when they did, doctors believed that children born in the next generation would likely have had terrible birth defects that would stop them from living. The family was quite literally breeding itself to the point of not being able to have children anymore. Detective Inspector Granger's investigation into where the family came from needed putting together bits and pieces from 3 countries and 50 years. The adults would not help, only staying angrily silent or giving wrong information on purpose. The big discovery came from an unexpected place: a retired social worker in New Zealand who had kept private notes about a troubling family she had met in 1976. Margaret Sutton was 24 years old when she visited a home in the countryside outside Christchurch. The family name in her records was Colt, though she noted even then the papers seemed doubtful. The father, a man named Timothy Colt, lived with what he said was his wife June, and their 5 children. But Sutton's observations did not match the official story. June seemed too young to be the mother of the oldest children. The family's behavior suggested relationships that didn't fit the clear categories on government forms. Sutton's notes, kept in a personal file she had after retiring, described Timothy as controlling and overly worried. He had refused to let her inside the house, doing the whole talk on the porch while family members watched from windows. When she tried to talk to the children one by one, he kept interrupting, answering questions meant for them. The oldest daughter, about 15, showed a clear respect for her father that Sutton found upsetting. Her body language suggested fear rather than respect. The visit had worried Sutton enough that she had written another report asking for continued checking. But when she returned 3 months later, the property was empty. Neighbors reported the family had left in the middle of the night, leaving no new address. The case file was eventually closed because the family had moved to another area where she had no power. Sutton never learned what happened to them, though the memory bothered her for many years. Granger's team checked Sutton's descriptions against the adults they had in custody. Betty would have been that 15-year-old daughter. The timing matched exactly. Birth records from New Zealand authorities confirmed that Timothy Colt had registered 5 children between 1961 and 1973. Betty, Charlie, Dwayne, Martha, and a 5th child named Frank who was not in current records. The mother listed on all birth papers was June Colt, though hospital records showed June herself had been born in 1958, making her only 3 years old when the first child was supposedly born to her. The trickery went deeper. Further checking showed that June was actually Timothy's daughter from an earlier relationship, though no papers existed for that earlier pairing. Timothy had started the pattern in an earlier generation, having children with his own offspring, then raising those children to continue the cycle. June had disappeared from all records after 1974. Whether she had died, run away, or been hidden away remained unknown. Australian immigration records showed the Colt family entering the country in 1978. Saying Western Australia was where they planned to go, they had presented themselves as a family unit. Timothy, his 5 children, and 2 grandchildren, who were actually the children of Timothy and his daughter, Betty, having children together. The immigration officers had noticed nothing unusual. The family looked poor but normal for country people moving to find farm work. Property records showed their moves across Australia like breadcrumbs, showing a planned move away from cities. They had bought 40 hectares outside Esperance in Western Australia, living there until 1985. Local school records showed some children went to school now and then during those years, never more than a few weeks at a time. Teachers who remembered them said the kids seemed scared of talking to others, who flinched at sudden movements, who spoke in bits and pieces rather than full sentences. In 1986, the family moved to South Australia, buying land far away in the Flinders Ranges. They stayed there for nearly 15 years, their longest time in one place. During this time, the children who would become the adults found on the Borowa property grew up and started having their own children. They became even more isolated. No school records exist from this time. No doctor visits, no contact with any government help of any kind. Timothy Colt died in 2001, according to a death certificate filed in South Australia. Cause of death listed as natural causes, confirmed by a country doctor who had been called to the property. The family buried him on their land without a formal ceremony. His death should have ended the cycle. Instead, it just got rid of the person who started it, leaving his children to continue the pattern he had set up. They had known no other way of life. The things he had made them do had become their normal, passed down like any other family tradition. Within months of Timothy's death, the family sold the South Australian property and moved to New South Wales, eventually settling on the Borowa land, where authorities would find them 11 years later. They weren't running from anything specific, just keeping up the moving pattern Timothy had set: stay alone, avoid being watched closely, move before anyone looked too closely. The plan had worked for more than 30 years. The family's arrival in New South Wales followed a pattern they had made perfect over many years. In March of 2002, they bought the Borowa property through a private sale that avoided normal real estate ways. The seller, an old farmer named Gerald Hutchkins, later told investigators he had been happy to get rid of land that had become too hard to take care of. He had met with Charlie, who said he was the family spokesman, exactly once. Cash payment, no questions asked. Hutchkins never visited the property after the deal was done. What made the New South Wales time especially important was how close the family was to cities, compared to where they had lived before. The property was only 40 km from Borowa, a town of over 1,000 people. A bigger town nearby was 60 km north. For the first time in their moving life, the family lived close enough to schools, hospitals, and social services. Yet, they didn't use any of these helps. Local people remembered seeing family members now and then in Young during the early years. A shopkeeper named Diana Prentice remembered a woman who looked like Martha buying large amounts of things like flour, sugar, cooking oil. Always paying with cash, never talking. The visits happened about every 6 weeks, always the same way. Martha would arrive in an old truck, load her purchases by herself, and leave. She never brought children, never stayed long, never came back if other customers were there. The family's ability to take care of themselves was almost complete. They didn't have electricity bills because they didn't use electricity. No water bills because they collected rainwater and used the property's pond. No sewage services because they dug outdoor toilets. They hunted rabbits and kangaroos for meat, grew vegetables in badly kept garden beds, kept chickens that roamed freely, producing eggs that added to their small food supply. They had created a closed system that needed very little contact with the outside. But being alone came with costs. A neighbor, Vincent Eldridge, whose land was next to the Colt property's eastern side, said he heard screams many times between 2004 and 2008. He had called the police twice. Both times, officers checked on the family but found nothing they could act on. The family said someone had hurt themselves by accident. No sign of immediate danger. No reason to do more. The screams stopped being reported after 2008. though Eldridge later said he had simply stopped calling, frustrated by the lack of help. School enrollment records told their own story of chances missed. In 2006, someone signed up 3 children at Borough Central School. The sign-up listed false birth dates and gave a phone number that didn't work. The children went for exactly 9 days before disappearing. Teachers remembered them as wild, unable to sit still, speaking in mumbled sentences that other students made fun of. One teacher, Judith Kramer, had started writing down her worries when the children simply stopped coming. Her reports went to the district office, but nothing was done because the family had not given a traceable address. A similar thing happened in 2009 at Young Public School. 2 children signed up, went to school now and then for 3 weeks, then disappeared. The principal tried to visit their home, but couldn't find the property with the unclear directions given. The problem was sent to officers who dealt with kids not going to school, but the case was eventually closed when the family couldn't be found. No one connected these scattered school sign-ups to the same family. Different names, different ages, different schools. The intentional hiding worked. Medical records were even scarcer. Emergency room visits at Young District Hospital showed 3 separate times between 2000 and 2011. A child with a broken arm, another with bad burns from a cooking fire, a third with an infection from an untreated wound. Each time, an adult gave very little information, refused more doctor visits and paid in cash. Hospital social workers marked all 3 cases as worrying, but the families moving around and false information stopped any organized help. The most shocking proof of system failure came from community services records. Between 2002 and 2012, 4 separate reports were made expressing worry about children on the property. Anonymous calls from people who had seen kids in bad condition during the family's rare trips to town. Each report started an investigation. Each investigation ended with the same result: unable to find family or confirm worries. The reports sat in different district offices, never put together into one file that might have shown the pattern. What nobody understood until after the 2012 intervention was that the family had gotten very good at avoiding being caught for 40 years. They knew exactly how much contact to have to avoid too much looking into things. Short school sign-ups met required education laws on paper. Rare doctor visits showed they weren't completely careless. Scattered reports across many areas stopped any one agency from seeing the full picture. They had learned to use the weaknesses in Australia's social safety net, the spaces between different areas where families could disappear, even while living in plain sight. The full DNA analysis finished in November of 2012 needed Dr. Salzberg to create what she called the most disturbing family history paper of her career. Normal family trees spread out, each group of children making the family bigger. The cult family tree folded in on itself, relationships bending back until the whole thing became a tangled mess of connected lines. The DNA mapping showed that Timothy Colt had children with his daughter Betty for 20 years. Those children, who were Betty's siblings by blood and her children by birth, had then had the next group of children through pairings among themselves. The DNA mapping confirmed Timothy Colt had children with his daughter Betty for 20 years. Those children had then had the next group of children through pairings among themselves, creating relationships that were beyond normal words. The words for family relationships simply failed to describe the truth. Ruth, the 17-year-old, was perhaps the most complicated case. DNA analysis showed her parents were Charlie and Betty, who were both children of Timothy. This made Ruth both the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Timothy at the same time. Her DNA showed a coefficient of family members having children together of 375, a number that was almost as high as it could be. For comparison, brothers and sisters who have children together create offspring with a coefficient of 0.25. Ruth's parents were more closely related than typical brothers and sisters. The younger children showed even higher coefficients. A 6-year-old boy showed a coefficient of 42, meaning his parents were themselves children of brother-sister pairings who then had children together. The mathematical truth was shocking. More than 40% of his genetic code was made of the same sequences inherited from both parents. In a healthy person with varied genes, that number would be close to 0. This level of genetic sameness existed nowhere in nature except in lab-created animal lines that had been bred within their own family, and even those rarely lasted beyond a few generations because of terrible health problems. Salzberg's report had a section that looked at what DNA experts call runs of homozygosity, sections of DNA where both copies of chromosomes are the same. In most people, these runs make up maybe 1% of their genes. In Timothy, they covered 11%, in Charlie and his siblings, 19%, in Ruth, 34%, in the youngest children some were over 40%. Each generation had essentially copied larger parts of damaged genetic material. getting rid of the variety that usually hides harmful mutations. The real problems appeared in what Dr. Salzberg called genetic load, the building up of bad hidden genes. Every human carries deadly or very harmful hidden gene problems, usually 5 to 10 of them. In healthy groups of people, these stay hidden because people rarely get the same harmful problem from both parents. But in the cult family, harmful genes had nowhere to hide. The children inherited the same broken genes from both sides, showing problems that should be very rare. One child carried 2 copies of a gene version linked to body function problems. Another had 2 copies of mutations affecting kidney development. A third showed genetic signs for a brain problem that would likely appear in her 20s. These weren't just one-time problems. Each child carried many building up genetic problems, their bodies struggling under the weight of many mutations that natural selection would have gotten rid of in a healthy breeding population. Perhaps most upsetting was the proof of miscarriages and baby deaths. A detailed look at the property found the remains of at least 3 babies buried in shallow graves. DNA testing of the remains showed even higher levels of family members having children together than the children who were alive, suggesting that the most badly affected children had died soon after birth or as very young babies. The family had been experiencing what animal breeders call inbreeding depression, where each generation shows more deaths, fewer births, and less overall health. Dr. Salzberg's analysis ended with a prediction that scared investigators. Based on the mathematical progress of family members having children together coefficients across 4 generations, she estimated that children born in another generation would have faced almost certain severe disabilities or death. The family was close to what DNA experts call an extinction vortex, where genetic variety drops so low that the population can no longer keep itself going. The cult family had been perhaps 1 generation away from complete genetic collapse. What made this especially horrifying was realizing that someone had to have known. The pattern of baby deaths, the clear physical problems in children who lived, the increasing disabilities across generations, all pointed to a conscious choice to continue despite clear proof of harm. This wasn't not knowing. The family had kept these practices on purpose, watching children suffer, burying dead babies, and still continuing pairings that guaranteed more of the same. The genetic proof showed not just a biological disaster, but a lack of right and wrong that had lasted for 50 years. The New South Wales Supreme Court trials that started in March of 2013 faced legal problems never seen before in Australian law. Justice Peter Biscoe, chosen to lead the case, faced basic questions about how to punish crimes that had happened across many areas, involved victims who couldn't talk clearly, and challenged the very rules of existing laws. The charges against the 4 adult brothers and sisters included family members having children together, not taking care of children, and hiding births. But building cases that could be punished from the genetic and spoken proof proved very hard. Laws about family members having children together needed proof of specific actions between clear people. The children couldn't give such spoken proof. They didn't have the mental ability to understand court proceedings, couldn't reliably say who had done what to whom, and showed trauma reactions that made asking questions very difficult. Prosecutors instead built their case on written proof. The DNA analysis gave undeniable proof that family members having children together had produced the children. Medical records showed planned neglect. Forensic proof from the property, including the buried baby remains, showed a pattern of hiding things. The prosecution's plan focused on proving the adults had knowingly kept a place of abuse rather than punishing individual actions. Betty became the first to go to trial in July of 2013. Her lawyer, Marcus Luon, tried to argue that she was as much a victim as someone who caused harm, raised in a place where family members having children together was normal, lacking the schooling or chance to understand the harm being done. Mental evaluations given to the court showed Betty had an IQ of 68, putting her in the range of mild thinking disability. She had never gone to school past primary level. Her whole way of seeing the world had been shaped by Timothy's purposefully isolated system. The prosecution fought back with proof that Betty had actively helped hide the family's practices. She had given false information during school sign-ups. She had lied to doctors. She had physically stopped children from talking to outsiders during the rare times when authority figures visited the property. Whether she fully understood the right and wrong of her actions became unimportant when prosecutors showed she had understood enough to know that being found out would lead to help. The jury thought for 6 days before saying she was guilty of family members having children together and child neglect. Justice Biscoe sentenced Betty to 10 years in prison with no chance of leaving early for 5 years. In his sentencing words, he recognized how complicated her situation was, but stressed that protecting children was more important than considering her own victimhood. The children she was supposed to care for had suffered terrible harm that she had actively worked to hide. Charlie's trial followed in October. Unlike Betty, he showed no thinking problems. His IQ tested at 94, which is normal. He had acted as the family's main contact with the outside world, handling property deals and buying supplies. The prosecution argued this showed clear awareness that their way of life went against social norms. Charlie had purposefully set up the family's life to avoid being watched closely, understanding very well what authorities would find if they looked too closely. His defense tried to say it was a different culture, suggesting the family had developed its own isolated culture with different rules. This argument fell apart when prosecutors showed proof that Charlie had clearly told children to lie to teachers and social workers during the short times they had gone to school. He had taught them to hide their home situation, to give false information about their family structure, to avoid answering questions about their parents. This wasn't a cultural difference. It was a conscious trick motivated by knowing they were doing wrong. The jury found Charlie guilty on all charges. Justice Biscoe gave a 15-year sentence with no chance of leaving early for 8 years, noting that Charlie's better thinking and leadership role within the family structure deserved a harsher punishment than Betty had received. Martha and Dwayne's cases were more complicated. Martha had stayed almost silent throughout the investigation, refusing to speak with police, psychologists, or her own lawyers. Mental evaluation found she was able to stand trial, but suffering from severe mental trauma that made her selectively unable to speak. Her trial went on with her almost total silence, with proof shown mostly through papers rather than talking. Dwayne, meanwhile, had vanished. 3 weeks before his planned trial date in January of 2014, he did not show up for a regular bail hearing. A warrant was issued, but he disappeared completely. Investigators thought he had run away to a faraway part of Queensland or possibly left Australia entirely using false papers. As of 2015, he was still at large, the only adult family member to escape being held accountable by law. The court put strict rules on all proceedings to keep them secret. Media could report that trials had happened, but could not name family members, describe the property's location beyond a general regional name, or publish pictures of any people involved. Justice Biscoe ruled that the children's right to not be identified was more important than the public's interest in knowing everything. The cult made-up name was given to protect their identities permanently. The detailed check of the Borough property, done over 3 months in late 2012, showed the planned way they had created isolation. Investigators found not just dirtness, but a purposefully built environment meant to stop outsiders from seeing and to keep absolute family control. The property didn't have any permanent building that would meet building safety rules. The main dwelling was a metal shell with no insulation, no windows, and a dirt floor. Inside, investigators found sleeping areas separated only by hanging blankets, making it seem like there was privacy when there was none. The space could comfortably fit maybe 6 people. 12 children and 4 adults had lived in this small area, their closeness ensuring constant watching and getting rid of any chance for private space. 3 more shelters were scattered on the property, built from old materials and plastic sheets. These were used as extra sleeping areas during warmer months, but offered no protection from winter cold. Forensic experts noted that the setup stopped any child from being alone from adult watching. Every sleeping space remained visible from many angles. The layout acted like an open prison where freedom to move only existed within carefully controlled limits. The lack of electricity became more darkly meaningful when looked at closely. Without power, the family had no telephone, no radio, no television. Children grew up without seeing media showing normal family structures, without hearing voices from outside their immediate area, without any way to compare their lives to others. The technological isolation was complete and planned. Several generators sat unused in a storage shed, suggesting the family had ways to make electricity, but chose not to. Water collection systems showed similar planning. The property had 3 large rainwater tanks that could hold thousands of liters. Yet, investigators found them dirty with trash and green stuff. The water was unsafe to drink. Instead, the family got water directly from a still pond where animals also drank. This choice didn't make practical sense unless seen as another way to control. Dirty water caused ongoing low-level sickness, keeping children weak and dependent, unable to build the physical strength that might allow them to escape or fight back. The outdoor toilets dug in different places around the property had been put purposefully close to living areas. The smell was very strong, attracting flies that swarmed constantly during warmer months. Health inspectors noted this went against basic cleanliness rules, that even poor country families usually understood. The placement suggested it was done on purpose rather than because they didn't know better. Living constantly near human waste made bad conditions seem normal, breaking down mental walls that might otherwise exist. Food storage told its own story of not enough food as a way to control. Investigators found very little stored food despite the family's claims of taking care of themselves. Garden plots showed signs of plants, but bad care that guaranteed very small amounts of food. The chicken group had fewer than a dozen birds, not enough to feed 16 people. Hunting tools existed, but showed little use. The family appeared to have kept themselves always close to starving, another factor ensuring weakness and dependence. Papers found in a locked metal box showed the family's money situation was much better than their living conditions suggested. Bank statements showed accounts with over 40,000 saved through government benefits, and money received for farm work done for a short time. The money had been carefully kept rather than spent on making living conditions better. Charlie controlled all accounts, keeping money power that made his authority stronger within the family structure. Children's personal items were almost nothing. A few changes of clothes, all worn out and dirty, no toys, no books, no personal items that might help them feel like individuals. Investigators found a single broken radio that no longer worked. Its presence suggested that at some point, perhaps years earlier, outside information had been available before being purposefully cut off. The property's location showed the final parts of the isolation strategy. Located at the end of a 4 km dirt road that turned off a rarely used country road, the property was practically invisible to people just passing by. Thick bushes hid it from neighboring properties. The nearest residents were 3 kilometers away, too far for sounds to carry or for neighbors to see daily activities. The family had achieved almost perfect physical isolation, while still being technically close enough to social services. Most disturbing were the changes to the property's edges. Although no formal fence enclosed the area, investigators found that paths leading away from the main compound had been purposefully blocked. Fallen trees left uncleared, blocked roads to neighboring properties. Thick bushes allowed to grow unchecked created natural barriers. The few clear paths led either to the pond or to the access road, both visible from the main dwelling. Children going in any other direction would face thick, difficult bushes and would be immediately noticed as gone. Vincent Eldridge, the neighbor, who had reported screams, told investigators he had once met 2 of the children who had wandered onto his property. They had run away when he came closer, disappearing back into the bushes with what he described as animal fear. He had thought they were simply shy country children. The memory bothered him after learning the truth. The children's move into foster care between 2012 and 2015 tested every belief Australian Child Welfare Services had about helping children get better and recover. Dr. Priest led a team of experts who faced problems that existed nowhere in their training or books. Ruth's placement failed within 6 weeks. Her foster family, who had experience with traumatized children, found themselves overwhelmed by behaviors they couldn't understand. She became very angry and violent when stopped from sleeping in the same room as her younger siblings. She secretly saved food without stopping, hiding it in her clothes and under her bed until it rotted. Most disturbing, she made sexual moves toward the foster father, unable to understand why he pulled away. When social workers tried to explain proper boundaries, she grew confused and upset, thinking their guidance was a rejection. She was moved to a special group home with staff trained in severe thinking problems. Even there, progress was very slow. After 3 years, she had learned to dress herself alone and could communicate basic needs in simple English. But big ideas like privacy, owning things, or planning for the future remained beyond her understanding. Psychologists believe she would need supervised care for the rest of her life. The younger children showed small improvements. Timothy, the deaf 9-year-old, got special ear implants that gave him some hearing back, but the brain paths for understanding language had closed during his most important growth years. Sign language lessons helped him communicate basic needs, yet he would never speak any language perfectly. His foster placement stayed steady, though his caregivers described him as emotionally flat, rarely showing joy or sadness beyond immediate physical needs. The 2 sisters who had needed dental surgery were eventually adopted by a family in regional Victoria. Of all the children, they showed the most ability to fit in, possibly because their genetic damage was less severe. By 2016, both attended special education programs and could talk with other kids, though they were still years behind in social and school growth. Their adoptive parents reported they still sometimes used their made-up language when stressed, going back to the only communication system that felt truly natural. Bluey's violent protective instincts never fully went away. Many foster placements failed when he attacked other children or adults he saw as threats to his siblings. By 2015, he had been placed in a secure youth facility after seriously hurting another foster child during what staff described as an attack without reason. Mental evaluation suggested he experienced constant worrying thoughts, seeing normal interactions as angry. His future remained poor, with experts predicting he would likely move to adult mental health facilities when he turned 18. Kip, the girl with the severe curved spine, had corrective surgery that helped her body some but left her with ongoing pain. Her foster placement became stable after she was put with a family that included a mother who was a former special education teacher. By 2016, she had learned to read at a basic level and could do simple math. Her emotional growth was far behind, but she showed an ability to form close bonds that offered hope for eventually living alone with ongoing help. The youngest children, those under 7 when removed, showed the strange truth of their situation. Their severe genetic problems created limits to their thinking that they would never go beyond. Yet their younger age when help came meant they had formed fewer fixed habits from their abusive environment. They would never be normal, but they might achieve stability within their limits. By 2020, the legal cases had ended, leaving behind questions more disturbing than answers. Betty finished her minimum sentence and was released under strict rules stopping contact with any of the children. She moved to a supervised housing facility in Western Sydney, her thinking limits needing ongoing help. Charlie remained in prison, his earliest possible release date set for 2026. Martha received a 7-year sentence after finally speaking during her trial, offering a confession that revealed nothing investigators hadn't already found. Dwayne was never found. The case forced a careful look at how such extreme abuse lasted without being noticed for generations. A government investigation done in 2014 found 43 separate times when help might have stopped the family's practices from continuing. The scattered school sign-ups, the emergency room visits, the neighbors' reports, the social workers' worries in New Zealand decades earlier. Each represented a possible moment where proper follow-through might have saved children from suffering. The investigation's findings were damning. Country social services operated with not enough money and bad coordination between different areas. Families who moved often could restart their interactions with authorities, stopping patterns from being noticed. Privacy laws sometimes stopped information sharing that might have shown worrying trends. The investigation made 17 suggestions, including required reporting systems across different areas and better programs to reach out to country families. But underneath the failures in how things were run lay more troubling questions about the nature of badness and who was to blame. Timothy Colt had started the cycle on purpose, yet he had been shaped by whatever environment produced him. His children had continued practices that harmed their own offspring. Yet they had known no other way. The line between victim and person who caused harm blurred across generations until it became almost impossible to tell apart. Punishment had been necessary, but it couldn't deal with the basic horror of a family system that had destroyed itself for 50 years. Experts believed the family members having children together had likely started in the 1960s, possibly earlier if Timothy himself was a product of family members having children together relationships. 4 or 5 generations had suffered, each worse than the last, speeding towards a genetic collapse that would have made further reproduction impossible. The family had been destroying itself with exactness, and nobody had noticed until the damage was terrible and could not be fixed. The children remain in care, their identities protected, their futures uncertain. The youngest are now teenagers. Ruth is in her late 20s, her thinking age stuck at 7. Some will need institutional help throughout their lives. Others might achieve limited independence. None will ever be truly normal. They carry in their bodies and minds the accumulated weight of decisions made decades before their births. Victims of a family system that treated human beings as things that could be replaced in a cycle of abuse that spanned continents and generations. The Borough property was eventually sold, the buildings torn down, the land returned to farm use. Nothing marks it as the place of one of Australia's most disturbing cases of planned family members having children together. The only lasting record exists in secret court documents and the damaged lives of 12 children who will spend the rest of their days getting better from childhoods that should never have been possible in a modern country. If this story has shocked you, if it's made you realize how darkness can hide in plain sight, how systems meant to protect can fail so completely, then share this video, like and subscribe. Because the most important stories are often the ones we would rather not hear. The ones that force us to face uncomfortable truths about the world we live in and the children we fail to protect.